Hey, what's up guys? My name is Moda and welcome back to the Mining Stacker YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to talk about how this time really is different, especially for us crypto miners, right? I know we typically hear that a lot. It's basically a meme when everybody's saying this time it's different, but again, for any of us who are GPU mining, ASIC mining, when we look at profitability, when we look at the numbers, when we look at the stats, when we look at hash rates, it is pretty drastically different from this time 4 years ago, right? So we're going to talk about it. We'll look at the current numbers. We'll look at the previous numbers so you can see exactly what we're talking about. So if that sounds good, guys, stay tuned. Let's get right to this thing. So I know it's basically a meme at this point when people are saying that, oh, this time it's different. For us who are mining, it is extremely different, right? Especially for me, it's a little bit more fresh just because I am newer to the scene. I started back in January 2021, so it is a little over 4 years ago. And even when I got in, things were already pretty much FOMO levels, right? So GPUs, 3060 Ti's, 3070s, they were already 800 plus. Profitability was there. Sentiment was there. It was just completely different. And not only in terms of GPU mining, but also just mining as a whole, right? ASIC mining was already at that point. ASIC mining looked drastically different to the point where it was pretty much out of touch for a lot of its plebs, especially for anybody just starting. Very similar to how people just starting now are like trying to get these L9s and stuff, where it's kind of out of reach for most, right? The difference being is that there's not even GPU mining, right? GPU mining last cycle was definitely a gateway for a lot of us who got in just because it made it easy for anybody to join, anybody to participate. If you had that existing hardware or if you purchased any, it was easier to scale and it was easier to grow, right? Which is a dramatic difference this time. It is not easy to grow. It has not been easy, ASIC or any kind of mining, whether it's ASIC or GPU mining. It's not been easy at all whatsoever, right? It's been more of a game of mining and hodling and just kind of betting on which one is going to do best. And the people who made out, like we've had pretty good dubs. We've also had quite a few L's playing that game, but it's definitely just difficult, right? It's been extremely hard to really have success at this, especially for any of you newer guys, right? So let's start by looking at the numbers so you guys can see what we're talking about here. We will start off with the ASICs. We'll look at a quick snapshot of where we are at currently. Again, this is March 18th, 2025. This is ASIC miner value. This is at a 10-cent kilowatt hour. As we kind of just quickly glance at it, if you look at the top end, not too bad. There's some $16. You go down, it's about $10. You go down a little bit further, about $4 a day. When you glance at it, doesn't look too bad until you dig a little bit deeper, right? So even just looking at the top few, right? Let's look at the top two. Number one, in a few weeks, these aren't going to be up there any longer. We know that the hash rate difficulty is going to go up massively on Alio. Chances are these are not going to be up there much longer, okay? So I wouldn't even factor these top two. The next two are both hydro units, which again, for us plebs, any at-home miners, these are three-phase. These require different infrastructure, not typical for us. I would also not count these. Then we go down the list. The next two are more of the AE boxes, the Alio ASICs, which again, in a few months, they're not going to be up here anyway. X44P hasn't even released yet. We don't even have a release window for this thing. So not even factor that one in. So again, kind of looks different once we kind of chop off the top end. The first available ASICs are the D1 and the L9, and these are both making about $10 a day, which are pretty good. And as we scroll down even further, kind of more the same, right? It's more of these Bitcoin Hydro ASICs and more script ASICs. Script ASICs have definitely been taking over and is essentially the majority of ASICs that are profitable, right? Aside from the Bitcoin ASICs, which have been holding up pretty well, but it's just hard to justify with everything going on, right? It does start to look pretty bleak as we scroll down the list, though, right? So as we scroll down, again, more script ASICs here. So like the Easy 100 Pro, it's a $13,000 ASIC, and it's making about $4 a day. Not great. iPolo V2, again, this is almost a $9,000 ASIC, making about $3 and change a day. Okay. As we scroll down even further, it's more of the same, more script ASICs. This is now the older gens, and those are making about $2 a day, and it gets extremely bleak as we scroll down, right? So it's more of the same, and it quickly goes down into being unprofitable, right? You don't have to go down much farther just to see unprofitable. As we scroll through, the other big standout is the sheer amount of miners that are lost in comparison to what's profitable. And again, this is at a 10-cent kilowatt hour. Okay, it's pretty dramatic, right? And as we scroll and compare here in a second, the other big difference you're going to see is the amount of ASICs that are available now versus what was there last cycle. Okay, so now let's take a look at the previous cycle. Let's go back in time. This is on the Wayback Machine, which is just takes snapshots of websites at a moment in time. This is from March 22nd, 2021. This is on ASIC miner value, and you can see how it's drastically different. Okay, so one funny thing you can see is that this bullshit with putting in the profitability, these crazy profitability numbers, and basing the cost of these ASICs based off of that is something that was there last cycle. It's not something new to just this cycle, which, for example, when we saw the AL3 or more extreme examples like the KS3 or the AL1 when that thing was announced, when the profitability was insane. And that's how they try to justify these $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 price points. This was there back then also, right? This is part of the game plan. This is why we're saying it's nothing new. Can see here, this is what started the Kadena hype, the KD5. Look at this profitability number. Obviously, this isn't with the market digesting the hash rate and difficulty increases, right? But again, a common thing back then. But as we scroll through the list, though, you can see the drastic difference in the amount of profitable ASICs, right? We scroll through, there's still a good amount in the 30s, a good amount in the 20s, and there's a wide variety, right? From S19Js, some of the Canaans, even on the altcoin side, the Z15s. We have just a wide variety of ASICs all the way through. Even scrolling down further, you can see how a lot of these were older releases also. Again, this is 2021, and these are releases from like 2019 that were still making 10 to 12 bucks a day. Okay, we scroll down even further. Can see how there's just still a lot more profitable units. And again, these are all even older hardware. This isn't even just like the latest and greatest at this time. Okay, we scroll down even further. Now we're finally hitting things that are at a loss, but again, look at the release dates on these things. Again, this snapshot is from 2021. These are ASICs that were released in 2016, 2017. Okay, kind of makes sense that they're at a loss. And then the list kind of quickly ends, right? Which is a pretty drastic difference from what we have now. Okay, kind of a crazy fact, kind of counted it. So from November 22nd to now, and this does include everything listed on ASIC miner value. So it is including some of the little bit axes and things like that. It was over 160 ASIC releases just since November 2022. Okay. That is insane, right? About more, not more than half, a little bit less than half of those were BTC ASICs. It was over 60. It's 22 Caspa ASICs. It's insane, right? It is very, very drastic difference from the prior times, which again, there's not even that many on here. Again, since just this bear market, there's more ASICs that were released than probably almost ever, right? Which is pretty daunting thing to kind of think about, okay? The overall arching theme of the whole video is going to be there's just an extreme oversaturation of the market with miners, right? With hardware that's available. So with ASICs, it's a little bit different because these are specific machines for mining. This isn't consumer grade hardware. So it is a little bit different in those regards, right? But at the end of the day, it's just, this is not going to be sustainable, right? Something has to definitely change, whether it's something breaking or just less miners as a whole, the tokenomics of things, like something definitely has to change because this is just not going to be sustainable. Okay. Even price wise, if we look at back then, this is a snapshot of April 14, 2021. This is on Crypto Miner Bros. At this point, the ASICs were already pretty high, right? Especially on the Bitcoin side, which is more where the interest was. S19s were already like 10 to 13K. Kind of a standout at this point is looking at some of the altcoin ASICs, which were still reasonably priced, right? Considering the profitability. You can see a Z15 here was about 3,500 bucks. Again, when we reference the profitability from back then, about 20 bucks a day. Okay, so even pricing was different, availability was different. It's just extremely different, right? There's no way to sugarcoat it. Even if like, okay, you make the argument, well, things were kind of bullish back then. Well, let's go back 3 months prior to then. So this snapshot is now December 27th, 2020. So this was kind of the beginning of things. Even at this time, though, things were still not looking too bad, right? You can see here, look at profitability. There still are a good amount of ASICs making a decent amount of profitability, right? And S19 was making about 10 bucks a day. Um, so pretty big difference, right? So now let's compare it with GPUs, right? Let's look at where GPUs were around this time. And also massively different, right? So this is now a snapshot of what to mine. This is March 21st, 2021. The default is 10 cent kilowatt hour. And this is with 3 480s. Okay, not even 580s. Again, these are 3 480s, which was extremely not so hot card even back then, right? So let's look at profitability. On Ethereum, you're making about $7 a day with freaking 3 480s, right? And it's not even just Ethereum, it was a lot of algos. You had a lot of choices here. Raven was making $4.25 a day, Beam was making $4 a day, Vertcoin $3 a day, Zano almost $3 a day, and the list kind of goes on, right? So a lot of options that were all profitable, not just break even. You got to go pretty far down the list to find things that were not making any money, and that's essentially it. Okay, when we compare it to now, drastically different, right? So this is again what to mine, 10 cent kilowatt hour. This is defaulted to 33070s, which is a different scale than the 480s. And your best bet is nothing is even break even, right? So ProgPow, Zano is losing 59 cents a day, and the list kind of goes on, right? Everything's essentially at a loss, right? So drastic difference. Even if you make the argument of, okay, well, let's go back a little bit before then, before the run up. So this is December 2020, kind of more the same, right? So again, this is 3 480s. ETH was making about $3 a day. Raven about $1 a day. So yes, the rewards weren't so hot, but you're definitely better than break even for quite a few of these things. And again, this is with 3 480s, okay, which isn't a whole lot, right? So definitely big differences. And again, kind of the same thing is that what is going to fix this, right? And you can make the argument, well, more miners have to capitulate, and yes, that is true, right? When we look at the overall hash rate, again, we're gonna reference some of these. This is for Flux, which is Zcash. We look at currently, we're at 2.32 megasouls, and it's kind of funny how back here around this time, around the peak of things, this is now, let's look at the date, January 2022. We're at pretty similar levels, right? Back, if we reference that as the exact time, let's go back to, yeah, we're about 1.2. We're kind of in the same range, actually, even back then than we are now, right? Yet profitability and everything is drastically different, okay? It's kind of funny to see here the big rise here during what? What do you think this is? It was the ETH merge, right? This is when ETH went proof of stake. So everybody flocked to the other algos. Now the thing is, like, is there going to be enough security on the network if we go back down to these levels? Arguably, yes, right? Because again, it had no issues during this whole time back here. Do we need more to capitulate? I would think so, especially considering where profitability is. It's kind of weird that there's still so much hash rate on there, arguably. And it kind of makes you wonder where it's coming from, right? Because it doesn't seem like it's here domestically just because of our electric rates. So is it abroad? Is it commercial entities? Like, is it... It's hard to really say, right? And it's kind of the same thing when we look at some of the other algos. Even Ravencoin, for example, right now is at about 5.4. If we look in the round in the same time frame, it was obviously higher back then, but considering the profitability difference, it is a massive difference. Okay, and it's kind of crazy to see where it was before all this, where it was a 30 terahash at one point, which is pretty insane. And again, you can see here the big peak from the merge when everybody flocked to it. Kind of similar story with Ergo, although theirs was pretty bad, if you guys remember, with that difficulty adjustment. It got really bad for a while, but kind of the same story, right? It's currently at 9 terahash versus back then. Let's go back to the end of 21. This is November here. It was about 15, so it was about double, right? So kind of the same thing. If we look at it though, it's not too different from where it was back then. So again, the question remains like, what's going to fix things here? Is it just revising incentive models? Do we really just have to wait for people to capitulate more? Like at this point, you would think that it would have kind of happened already because it's been quite a few months, and essentially it's been most of this bear market where it's not really been profitable. Okay, so there was a few peaks and valleys, but they weren't really sustained, right? And this is another big difference, is that as time goes on and time kind of runs out, potentially if this cycle plays out, there's not a whole lot of time left for any profitable mining. Like even if things were to turn around tomorrow, if this thing peaks out in October, November, it's not a whole lot of time, right? And it's hard to say what's even going to happen beyond the peak. Like, are things going to still remain profitable? When ETH was around, it was, right? In reality, all the way through the ETH merge, which was almost a year beyond the peak, things were still profitable. Not very profitable, but they were profitable, right? I don't know if that's going to happen this time. Like, I have a feeling that even if things do kind of turn around, if we peak around the same time, it may not be profitable for much longer beyond that, okay? And this isn't something that's specific to the GPU side. It's very similar on the ASIC side, right? So the biggest dramatic one was with Caspa, was how fast it increased. Obviously, we're expecting massive increases considering how much more efficient the ASICs were. We're bullish on it. I just didn't even see it going up this quickly, this aggressively, so fast. Okay, I remember specifically making one video when we're talking about it, giving a prediction of when it was going to reach, 500 petahash. And at that time, it seemed insane. Like I remember specifically because somebody had retweeted a clip of it on X saying, oh, look at this guy. He's saying it's going to reach 500 petahash by then. This is a crazy. And that was only a fraction of what it ended up being, right? We're currently at 1.19 exahash, peaking about 1.5, right? It just went up so massively. So again, it's kind of more the same, that there's just so much damn hash rate, right? It can't really sustain this for this amount of time. Okay, and we're seeing this with all these new algos who are intentionally going to ASICs, right? We've seen with Radiant, now most recently Nexa, as well as these others, Alephium and such. It's crazy. It's just an extreme oversaturation of the market. I mean, even again, looking at how many ASICs have released, again with Caspa, it was over 20 ASICs that have released just in this short time span, right? Just since September 23. It's insane, right? It's insane to see how it's gone through. And again, with Bitcoin, again, like we mentioned, it was about 60 of them since freaking the bear market started, right? Now, all time, just since that point it started, right? It's just signaling an extreme saturation of the market, right? And it is extreme and it is different. Like even Bitcoin ASIC mining, which a lot of us say was tried and true, that's the one you want to go into because it's the one that's going to be around. And yes, that is definitely true, right? Realistically, there's only a small handful of projects I believe in beyond the cycle, Bitcoin really being the only one, right? So as far as looking at differences, it is massively different, right? So again, this is the most extreme example, right? Realistically, we thought it was GPUs with CAS basics. Freaking Bitcoin, man. Let's look at the hash rate from where we were back then. Okay, so back then, let's look at the peak. So this was the China mining ban, and this is what that big old dip was. If you guys remember, that's what kind of caused that initial drop in price, causing us to have a double peak last cycle. But if we go to November 2021 and look at where the hash rate was, we can ballpark it at about 170 exahash. We are currently at 815 exahash. Okay, so November 2021, where was the price at? It was at around its peak, around 67K. Currently, Bitcoin is at around 80K, right? So not that big of a difference. Yet the hash rate has increased 5x since then. 5 times, bros. Okay, it is a massive difference in profitability. And this is not even factoring in the halving. On top of that, factoring in the halving is just insane how different it is. There is just, even here, there's just such an extreme oversaturation of hardware in the market. Okay, with Bitcoin it's a little bit different because it has been able to sustain it, but that's why the profitability is so low. And that's why in reality it's probably not going to get a ton better, even buying the latest and greatest, right? So that's why, like I've been saying, that if you're interested, you have to have every advantage possible over these ASIC farms, which is having extremely low to no power cost and extreme efficiency. Okay, just because you're competing against not even just here, the Bitcoin mining companies here in the US, right? I think the bigger issue is going abroad. Now there's countries, there are nations. Again, there's places in the world where like 1 to 2 cent kilowatt hour prices aren't uncommon. To us, it's like mind blowing. Oh man, we got to have 7 cents and under. It's like you're competing against farms that, in some cases, especially the ones that are sponsored by nations, essentially have free electric. Okay, and the way things are escalating with the strategic reserves and with countries going forward, what do you think is going to kind of happen? Those places that have extremely cheap to no cost on the infrastructure are going to get into this, right? And we've already seen it. We've already seen a big push in like portions of Africa, places in South America, places in the Middle East where they have low to no power costs. And that's who you're competing with, right? That's who's stacking this hardware. So to us, like, oh, okay, they're going to cycle the old hardware, they're going to go into that. If you have no electric overhead, you don't give a crap. You're going to get all the old super cheap hardware that these big mining companies are cycling through. Okay, because to them, when you have no overhead, just add as many as you can, right? And it's insane to think about, and it's insane to think about it's only going to get worse, right? So there's still, again, on the oversaturation theme, there's just so many more ASICs that are so much more powerful, and then it's just going to change things, right? So even these big places here that we've seen those videos of these mining farms with like racks on racks on racks of those air-cooled units, even that's going to change because of units like this, which are just so much more compact. You can fit a ton of these in a small amount of space. And again, each unit, this single unit is 860 terahash. Okay, it's mind-blowing to think of the density in comparison to have these freaking big old factories that are like miles long and such. Like, you don't have the need for that with things like this, which is going to come, right? These are built for industrial use cases. This is what's coming. This is where you're competing against. Okay, again, last cycle, latest and greatest was 100 terahash units. These are 800 terahash, and then profile-wise, size-wise, density-wise, look at how small these things are. Okay, it was like looking up videos, like there's racks, like we're talking about how the ant rack that we're kind of clearing that thing out, just because form factor wise, it doesn't make any sense, right? Things like this make way more sense because on this single rack that is the same size as the ant rack, instead of fitting 4 units, you could fit 14, right? This thing is made for 14 of these freaking units, right? That's like 12 petahash. Okay, just kind of put that in your head. 12 petahash can fit in this singular little rack. Okay, and then multiply that by, again, we saw this at like Mining Disrupt last year, a container of these things. Like the density aspect is going to be so much mind-blowingly different comparing, again, one of these slots to these big ass Bitcoin ASICs. Okay, it's going to only kind of get worse, right? Like I would almost be extremely bearish on all these mining companies here in the US unless they are like sub 2 cents. Again, there's places in South America, there's places in Africa, there's places in the Middle East that's who you're competing against. And those are commercial companies. That's not even factoring in nation states that are going to do what they can to do it on no power, especially the ones who are using like natural resources, hydro, geothermal, etc., etc. Okay, it's just crazy to kind of think about, and it's hard to imagine how this thing goes going forward. Like what is the future going to be? What is next cycle going to be like, especially if this trend continues, right? With the hash rate going up so massively. Or are things going to finally break? Like what is it going to take? Right? So it's hard to say what kind of fixes this. In reality, it's capitulation, it's less people mining. Is that going to happen though? Again, there's all these like NASDAQ and listed companies that are here and just incentivized to continue to grow. Like at what point are things going to change? Like at what point Because essentially, if you think about it, all these companies are on the old infrastructure. Okay, new companies that are building now in these other countries are using state of the art, right? It's going to be a completely different thing, right? So whether it's mining on the industrial end or even for us on the low end, us little home miners, is there still going to be a place for us? I think so, but I mean, things are going to have to change, right? We can't have this inundation of like all these different ASIC companies. It's going to be a game of who survives, right? It's going to come to a point, and in my opinion, we're already kind of already at that point where there's already not a whole lot of interest in a lot of these ASICs just because of them playing the same game over and over. And before it was just like the Gold Shell, the Ivy Links. It was literally just them two. They were the main players. Now there's new companies coming every week, right? Even on the industrial end or the altcoin ASIC mining end, it definitely has to change, right? It's going to be a game of who's the most efficient and who's the best, right? It's kind of hard to say. Like, are they going to survive? Are they going to be around? Who knows, right? Because at the end of the day, they're investing all this money and into these new chips. It's like, are they even going to sell? Like right now with like the iceriver ASICs, those new KS7s, is there even going to be interest? Are they even going to be able to recoup that cost of R&D? Who knows, right? It's hard to say where we really go from here. In my opinion, though, it has to be less units being released, less manufacturers releasing these units, and it's going to be a game of who creates the best, right? It's going to be a game of efficiency and just weeding out the herd, right? It's just, again, like we mentioned, the common theme here is just there's an oversaturation. There's too many ASICs, there's too many manufacturers, too many releases. Okay, something is going to have to break. Whether it's some of these projects not even making it because of the sell pressure is too extreme that it just kind of goes to zero, or these ASIC manufacturers, some of them are going to have to go through bankruptcy, some of them are going to have to leave the game completely. We're going to have to see, right? But again, if things kind of remain at the rate that we're going, it's just not going to be sustainable, right? So when we look into the future, when we look into the next cycle, again, to me, in my opinion, it is going to be little at-home ASICs for us plebs. Things are probably going to be different, probably going to be less manufacturers. They're probably going to be more expensive. It's going to be on a smaller scale, but it's hard to say, right? Because we saw like the battles with like iceriver and bitmain where it was just a game of like a race to zero, right? We mentioned that before where it was like, okay, they started at like 30K, then 20K, 10K, 5K, and now you can't even give them away, right? It's crazy, but that's what it's going to kind of take, right? It's going to be a battle of the best, and that's going to be who remains. We'll see, bros. It's a very kind of confusing time because, again, it's hard to say what's good here because at the end of the day, in reality, we do want the competition. It seems like there's almost too much competition, but the fact of the matter is there's too much garbage that gets released, right? But unfortunately, people who are still new to the game, there's always newcomers, and they're just kind of getting wrecked and they're leaving, but it seems like they're getting replaced by the same amount of people, right? And this is where it gets kind of confusing and kind of tricky, and that's why I know I'll do a lot of these like ASIC reviews and we talk about profitability and outlook, and most of them are pretty on the doom and gloom side, but this is a big reason why, right? Again, we need like a better outlook on things. It's hard to really recommend anything right now because in reality, it's more of a bet, right? And that's what we've kind of talked about since even the beginning. Even with the early ones I purchased, it was a bet, right? It's not like I'm buying any of these things with like extreme confidence. Like, yes, they are 100% going to ROI. I'm going to make X amount. We don't know, right? It's definitely a big gamble. And that's kind of the unfortunate part is that it's what it's kind of turned into more than anything, right? It's not really a true investment. It's not really a true business thing. It's more of a gamble, right? And that's what's made this cycle so much more different and so much more difficult than previous ones, right? If you were just buying an ASIC, plugging it in, and not doing anything and expecting great returns, you had a very hard time, right? So luckily for me, I'm more on the proactive side, buying and selling, flipping into things, doing different things, and that's kind of the only reason we kind of made out well. If I wasn't so proactive, I was just kind of leaning back, would have been a very difficult time, especially on the GPU side. Like if you've just been selling that crypto to pay your electric every month, it's been a horrendous time, right? It's literally been a game of holding certain coins. Luckily, some of them made out well. If they didn't make out so well, we would be in a completely different position, right? But at the same time, if we didn't take the risk, you're not going to get any reward, right? But it's just been extremely difficult, right? So it's kind of my overall thoughts. It's hard to say where we go from here. We're going to have to see how high this cycle goes and then kind of make better guesses from there, right? But that's why realistically, I mentioned before, any of the big boy ASICs aren't really on my radar just because of where we're at in the cycle. It's hard to say if it repeats though, right? Because again, there's a lot of differences here on this side. So a lot of differences even on the coin side as far as looking at market dynamics from previous cycles also. And everybody points to, oh, this time it's the exact same things are lining up. In my opinion, they're not, right? It is drastically different. The macro is affecting things a lot more. This dip currently we're in seems very similar to like the China mining ban dip from last cycle, right? Is it going to play out that way? Are we ahead of the cycle? Is the cycle going to go further? Is this the last cycle? It's a lot of hypotheticals that it's hard to say where we're going to go. I'm preparing for any scenario. It's just really, really difficult to kind of predict, right? But I think the biggest thing is to kind of be open to different things, right? The cycle may peak earlier, may peak later. Who knows? You kind of have to like dig in, look at different theories, look at different market dynamics, and kind of make your own decisions there. But let me know in the comments, guys, though, what do you guys think? Like, what do you guys think can actually fix the situation? Do you think it's fixable this cycle, or do you think it's just going to be a shit show the rest of the cycle? Let me know in the comments, guys. Please comment, like, and subscribe, guys. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I am out.